I'd like to say a few words about the public dimension of morality. Very often in our society, moral discussions are repressed, suppressed, or not considered fit for public discussion. I'd like to present an alternative perspective. The public dimension of morality is something that drives Pope John Paul II in the 3rd chapter of Veritatis Splendor. And the core of his thinking here is that living a life in the truth of God and the love of God is not a burden, but rather, as Christ teaches, the truth shall set you free. What we're saying here is that morality can be and should be at the service of all people. Morality and moral theology are not about imposing ideologies or burdens upon people, but they're about leading people into the truth and fulfillment of their own existence. Maybe I can put the point this way. Moral theology is not intended just at making people more religious, but it's also intended to help people become more human. That is, to reach the fulfillment of their human existence, to live in freedom and truth. That puts into context a question I'm often asked about, and that is John Paul's sometimes challenging thoughts upon martyrdom. Why did he in Veritatis Splendor talk about martyrdom in the context of morality? The key here is understanding that martyrdom comes from a Greek word, martyria, which doesn't just refer to the death of a person, but to their witness. Martyrdom technically is witness to faith and values. And I think that the moral life in that way is a modern day martyrdom in more ways than one. But the witness aspect is important. Witnessing to the moral life is important because it's a witness to others that says, this is the way of God. But not only that, but this way is good news for human beings, and not the bad news by which it's often misrepresented. And this is something that I think that is very, very important. Too often, morality is seen as a burden that lays heavy loads upon people. But yet, if we look to the depths and the core of authentic morality, we find that it doesn't burden people with rules, regulations, or things like that, but it actually frees people. It liberates them to be their authentic, true selves. So the public dimension of morality is not about impositions or constrictions, but it's about authentic freedom. In the public life, for example, John Paul II says, Christian morality can and should free people from the bondage of lives and fear. The freedom discovered in Christian moral life liberates people from totalitarianism of one form or another. And to understand the Pope, bear in mind that he spent his formative years in what has been called by many people living in the shadow of Auschwitz. He lived under the totalitarianism of the Nazis, and then under the totalitarianism of the communists. He's seen totalitarianism from the left and from the right. And the answer to totalitarianism in all its different forms, according to John Paul, is love and freedom. Freedom from the bondage of lies and fear. And totalitarianism, the Pope very perceptively points out, is something that results when we lose our transcendent focus, and when we lose our focus on what is above, when we lose our focus on God, we lose sight of and deny our human freedom. And I think this puts into context something the Pope says in Veritatis Splendor 107 about evangelization. Do we evangelize by saying, here is the bad news, here is the burden, and we want you to suffer like we do? It's nothing of the sort. Evangelization involves the proclamation of a morality that frees us, liberates us, helps us become more human. And this is because, and I'm going to quote John Paul at length here, the life of holiness, which is resplendent in so many members of the people of God, humble and often unseen, constitutes the simplest and most attractive way to perceive at once the beauty of truth, the liberating force of God's love, and the value of unconditional fidelity to all the demands of the Lord's law, even in the most difficult situations. This is the same idea taken up by Augustine in the first page of his Confessions. The thought of you, God, stirs us so deeply that we cannot be content unless we praise you, because you've made us for yourself, and our hearts find no peace until they rest in you. The aim of morality and moral theology, then, is to help us discover the way in which we can gain the peace of resting in God. So morality and moral theology are ultimately about finding that peace, that fulfillment of resting in the love of God. And when we talk about the public dimension of morality, this is what we can be and what John Paul says we should be doing. Not imposing our views on others as a burden, but sharing what we have, the experience of living in the love of God, the experience of living in the fulfillment of what it means to be human. In other words, that ultimate happiness, ultimate love, ultimate fulfillment come from living this moral life, of living in the love of God and the affirmation of our human persons. For further reading on this, and for someone who says this so much better than I could ever do, I strongly suggest St. John Paul II's Veritatis Splendor, especially chapter 3. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and God bless.